Good morning and welcome everyone to the Biotech Predictions webinar. My name is Ali Ukani and I drive the ESG investment division at Peak Asset Management Melbourne. It gives me great pleasure to welcome on board an esteemed panel of speakers today. We're looking forward to making it a good one. Before I introduce our panelists, a very big thank you to Rudy and his team at Monsoon Communications, without whom this webinar would not be possible. A bit about our panelists today. On the panel today, we've got Matt McNamara from Horizon 3 Biotech Fund. We've got Megan Baldwin from Opthea Limited. We've got John Pilcher from Neuren Pharmaceuticals, Mark Pachacz from Bioshares, Gavin from Avecho, John Melki from Genetic Signatures. A bit about Peak and what we do. We're a Melbourne-based boutique investment management firm. We run a co-investment model, which means that in everything that we do, we have to back with our own capital, and these can be IPOs, placements, and pre-IPOs. A bit about what we'll be talking in terms of the panel today. We're talking about biotech and all things biotech. If you are a follower of the investment segment, then you know that since the start of COVID, the segment's grown rapidly. It's estimated that the biotech market will grow up to upwards of 727 billion by the year of 2025. Growing at a CAGR of 7.4%. So with that in mind, we're looking at a few tips and tricks that you can take away from this webinar today. As you might already be aware of, this is a live webinar, so you can put in your questions in the chat at any time. We encourage you to do so. We'll be taking questions from yourselves today, and the panelists will be answering it after their short presentations. So please feel free to put in your questions in the chat. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist today. Matt, welcome to the panel. Could you tell us a bit about Horizon 3?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. Thanks for being here. For those that don't know, Horizon 3 Biotech Fund is founded by Jean Sun and Mike Sullivan, and a name that will be well known to many of you. Glenn Cross is involved as well on the board. The purpose of the fund is to improve lives globally and high aspirations, but it really does indicate our decision-making process. And we actually invest in later stage biotech. So, and that's everyone wants to know what later stage means. It's obviously not early, but how we define it is that the companies that we invest in only have one or two milestones to achieve, realistic milestones to achieve before an exit opportunity for us. So we're not in it for the long term, 2, 3, 4 years. We invest in Australian public and private, and also international private. We've got an IC that many of your listeners will know about. Let me just turn my phone off. We've got Bev Thomas, who is clinical trials expert and CEO of a clinical trial team, and also has investment expertise. Scott Power, who's on the panel. Paul Field, who's done a lot of business development across the sector internationally. Tam Nguyen, involved in St. Vincent's research, and Dr. May, who's a part of Huikang in China. And very simply, our investment strategy is to invest in companies that we think can deliver a one-time return per annum of investment. Not all do, but that'll give us, that definitely be our greater than 20% IRR.
It's excellent. Thanks for that introduction, Matt. So obviously, the biotech space has, blown up since COVID and since 2020. I guess the first thing we'd like to know is, what have you seen from a Horizon 3 perspective over the last 2 years? And what trends do you see as some of the key drivers in the biotech space this year?
Yeah, some of this will be common. People have heard of a lot of this stuff before, but from our perspective, personalized medicine is a real driver going forward. To map your own genome, the cost is down to, I think, $300 now. So to get your own personal genome and make informed treatment decisions with that is certainly a trend. IT incorporated into more medical devices. There's a company in Canada called Canary Medical that's doing total knee replacements, and they've done a deal with Zimmer because their total knee actually talks has Bluetooth communication and can tell you what's going on in the patient's knee. We all know telehealth has taken off, so digital assessment and diagnosis and treatment of patients is a trend we see continuing. Another area, artificial intelligence and immunotherapies. We'll just go from strength to strength. Two areas where maybe a bit maligned or maybe not as successful as they could or should, that I think will continue to grow: microbiome and stem cells. I'm expecting, some eventual breakthrough with treatment options there. An interesting one that that some of the more techie and IT people will find interesting: synthetic DNA is being put on silicon chips and improving data and storage. It might just be the key to Moore's law continuing. And as a result, big data and Internet of Things. The FDA, believe it or not, doing speedier reviews, and there's an example of that, real-time oncology review. They're using smart drug development and clinical trial analysis, and aducanumab was an example of that. And an oldie but a goodie, psychedelics. Psilocybin it seems to be making a realistic comeback, and certainly in treating depression. So there's some of the things that come to mind to our team.
Yeah, it's excellent. I mean, some really, really good fields in there. I guess, Matt, taking a step back, just putting my investor hat on, right? When you're entering these spheres as an investor, it can be quite a daunting task. So I guess the question is, what do you look for when looking for a company within a particular field, such as psychedelics or immunotherapy? What's the investment process like?
Well, we have a long list of criteria that the company has to satisfy before we invest in something. And we have an approach that we call our Achilles heel approach. And, I can talk to someone for 5 minutes or take a presentation for an hour, and we actually hone in on the negatives. And I know that sounds very negative, but it's easy to fall in love with something and ignore the potential problems. But we'll hone in on, whether it's IP, whether it's competition, whether it's the timeline's too long, whether the mechanism of action is realistic, etc. So in a roundabout way to answer your question, we look at the Achilles heel and try to kill the project off. And like the Berkshire Hathaway guys, we just say no, 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 no many, many times until we can't say no, and then we start doing the most thorough due diligence.
Excellent. And the final question, Matt, is can you tell us some of the companies that you'll be watching this year, particularly in the listed space?
Yeah, I'll obviously talk our book, EBR Systems. Your audience may have seen that was a new listing late last year. I think it was December at $1.08. It's now down around 60 cents. It's a wireless pacemaker. Nothing has changed in the investment thesis for us, so except the share price, which is almost halved, and therefore I think that makes great value. So it is excellent technology out of the States. It's been followed significantly by some institutional investors here, and there's no rhyme or reason why it should have, dropped in the 60 cent mark. The other one, which Paul Gavin will talk to you at greater length, is Avecho Biotechnology, drug delivery technology, tocopherol phosphate mixture, enhancing and differentiating proven products. Paul will take you through some good data, and he might even tell you that there's some more good data coming. Another one on the ASX is Volpara Health. This is AI-powered SaaS used for saving families from breast cancer and lung cancer, which is lesser known. They haven't moved so much into that space yet, but it's a very similar business model. They are expecting solid results. They have announced that to the market for the last quarter. I don't think they've released them yet. Must be coming any day now. They have 34% market share in the US, meaning 34% of women that have a breast examination in the US has the Volpara Health software run over their images to help the clinicians make better decisions, and that's only going to increase.
Great, insightful as always. Thanks, Matt. I'd like to welcome everybody who's just joined us. Just a reminder that feel free to copy in your questions in the chat, and we'll be asking the speakers as you do. Please join me in welcoming our next panelist, Megan Baldwin of Opthea Limited. Stock code is OPT. Welcome to the panel, Megan. Could you tell us a bit about the company?
Sure, thanks, Ali. We are an ASX and NASDAQ listed company. We're developing a therapy for the treatment of wet age-related macular degeneration, which is a retinal eye disease.
That's excellent. And I believe, Megan, did you have a few slides that you'd like to take us through just a bit more about the business?
Yeah, sure. I'll now share my screen and we'll do our brief presentation for our callers. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks everyone for attending today's event, and thanks for the opportunity to participate. As I mentioned earlier, we are an ASX and NASDAQ listed company. We're developing our therapy OPT302 for the treatment of retinal eye diseases, and we are currently in phase 3 clinical development with a view to reading out the top line data from that phase 3 late stage clinical program in 2023 towards the end of that calendar year. So there are a number of retinal eye diseases which cause severe vision loss. And as I mentioned, we are focused on the treatment of wet age-related macular degeneration, or wet AMD. This is a disease of the aging process. It typically affects people over the age of 50 years, and it is a highly prevalent disease, increasing in prevalence actually as the population ages. It is estimated to affect about 3.5 million people in the United States and Europe alone, and is really characterised by lesions that develop at the back of the eye which affect vision, and those lesions really are made up of proliferative blood vessels as well as fluid or edema that occurs at the back of the eye, and those two events, biological processes, actually affect visual acuity in the patient. We are focused on that disease right now for our late stage clinical development program. We've also generated data in a second retinal disease called diabetic macular edema, which in its own right is a very large commercial opportunity. And in the longer term, see the utility of our OPT302 molecule across a variety of different retinal eye diseases, which we can expand our development program into. I think what's important to recognise for these retinal eye diseases, and particularly wet AMD, is that there's really only one class of molecules or drugs that are approved for the treatment of the disease. There are several that are approved, but they all do the same thing. They are part of the VEGF-A inhibitor class of molecules, and there are a number of other companies that are developing new forms of VEGF-A inhibitors in order to treat this disease. We are quite distinct from that approach in that we have a novel mechanism of action, and our strategy is to add on to any of the existing standard of care treatments in order to address the unmet medical need for these patients and have these patients actually respond better and have improved visual acuity when OPT302 is added to their treatment regimen. So the problem with the existing standard of care treatments that are available for patients is that many patients do not respond optimally to those treatments. 45% or more of the patients that receive standard of care treatments such as drugs like Lucentis, Eylea, or even off-label Avastin, all of which are VEGF-A inhibitors, many of those patients actually do not achieve a meaningful visual acuity gain, and there's still further room for improvement. The majority, over 2/3, will continue to have fluid at the back of the eye, and many of them will actually go on to experience a loss of visual acuity despite receiving treatment. So even if patients receive therapy on a very regular basis and they have an improvement or a stabilisation of their vision, it is the vast minority that actually have no further room for improvement, and the majority can actually benefit from having an additional therapy added to their treatment so that they can resume normal routine daily activities such as driving a car, reading a book, and being able to recognise faces of their family, etc. Now, why is this the problem? Why is this a problem? Well, the existing standard of care treatments are so specifically targeted to just one molecule that's involved in the disease process that they're not 100% effective. What we have at Opthea is a therapy that targets alternative members of that same family of molecules. We target VEGF-C and VEGF-D, and we're developing this therapy to be used in conjunction with any of the existing standard of care treatments or next generation compounds which may actually make it onto the market. Importantly, what our therapy can do is actually shut down a very important pathway that's actually involved in mediating the resistance to the standard of care treatments. And so by using our therapy, we can achieve a broader blockade of the processes and actually have that translate into better outcomes for patients. So that's the solution. OPT302 really does have the potential to be the next transformative step in the treatment of this disease. Right now, physicians are really only offering patients a switch from one VEGF-A inhibitor to another. And we, as a phase 3 company now, are the most advanced company with a novel therapy in development, with a new mechanism of action that has already demonstrated evidence of improving vision outcomes in patients. This is our molecule. It's a trap molecule. It's quite a large molecule, which is what you want when you inject it into the eye, so that it does, it is retained in the eye for a number of months. It's 140 kilodaltons, and it actually structurally looks very, very similar to the blockbuster agent Eylea, and it has characteristics that we believe match the safety profile, but also the durability and efficacy profile of some of those existing standard of care therapies. There really has been very little transformation in the retinal disease space. We know that several VEGF-A inhibitors over many, many years have been approved, but there's been no new mechanism approved since the first VEGF-A inhibitor was approved over 15 years ago. And there's really only been incremental benefits for patients during that time. So what we offer with OPT302 is a new mechanism which patients can then receive to improve their vision response. And this enables us, because we are agnostic to the particular standard of care treatment that we can add on to, and we've designed our phase 3 accordingly so that we end up with a very broad label that enables us to be used in all patients, means that we can start to capture not only the existing approved market, which right now is in excess of $12 billion per annum, but it also enables us to tap into the Avastin market as well, for which about 50% of the wet AMD patients worldwide actually receive Avastin, which is used off-label for the treatment of these diseases. We are agnostic with respect to the background standard of care, and in that way we are uniquely positioned to tap into the entire VEGF-A inhibitor market, which indeed is in excess of $20 billion per annum right now. We also have a unique proposition. We are the only company developing a biologics that is specific for these members of the VEGF family. You can see here with the filled or bold square boxes that most of the drugs that are in development are actually me-too compounds that are seeking to compete with drugs like Lucentis, drugs like Eylea. However, we are novel and differentiated, and the most advanced product that targets a novel mechanism that has the potential to actually improve outcomes for patients. And that is a very unique position for our company, and we are indeed the most advanced in positioning this molecule as the next treatment for patients coming through. We now have significant experience with the molecule. We've conducted quite an extensive clinical program, having conducted a 51-patient phase 1/2A clinical trial in wet AMD. We have clinical experience in diabetic macular edema as well. But today, just at a high level, I'll focus on the randomized controlled clinical outcomes of our phase 2B clinical trial, which was in treatment-naive wet AMD patients. It was a 366 patient study that gave us a lot of indication of the superior benefit of our drug and has really guided how we are planning our phase 3 clinical development program as well. The phase 2B study recruited 366 treatment-naive wet AMD patients. It was a 3-arm study, and we asked the question, does OPT302 added to standard of care Lucentis treatment result in superior clinical outcomes? We also knew going into this study that there were certain wet AMD lesion types that had a particular refractoriness or did not respond so well to standard of care treatment. And what we found in the outcomes of our phase 2B study is that these are indeed the patients that respond best to having OPT302 added to their treatment regimen. And this indeed constitutes the majority of patients with wet AMD. These minimally classic and occult lesion patients are about 80% of the real world population of wet AMD patients. When OPT302 was added to their treatment, we saw an additional 5.7 letters of visual acuity gain over and above standard care treatment, which was highly statistically significant. This translates into over an additional line of visual acuity benefit for patients that received our therapy on top of standard of care. We also saw a very profound, almost a twofold improvement in the response of patients who had actually a particular subtype of wet AMD, which is highly prevalent in the Asian population and which doesn't respond very well to standard of care treatment, demonstrating a further 6.7 letter gain of visual acuity in this particular patient population. And this, indeed, given it is the most prevalent form of wet AMD worldwide, is a very large commercial opportunity for Opthea, and one that we are very interested in pursuing down the road with our clinical development program. Across the total patient population, we hit the primary endpoint of the study, also showing superior benefit across the total population of wet AMD patients after only 6 months of treatment. This led us into our phase 3 pivotal program. The phase 3 pivotal program consists of 2 990 patient studies. One is in combination with Lucentis, one's in combination with Coast, and the primary endpoint of the study is after 12 months of treatment. We expect to report out the top-line data at the end of 2023, and then on the basis of that data, submit for marketing authorizations in the US to start with, followed by the rest of the world. So we have a novel therapy that has the potential to revolutionise the treatment of wet AMD and improve visual acuity for millions of patients. We've received fast track designation for this therapy, which provides certain advantages as we take this forward into commercialisation. We're preparing for phase 3 readout in the second half of 2023 and commercial launch in 2024. And this is obviously a multi-million-dollar commercial opportunity, and one where we have really substantial long-term value opportunity given our IP position and the opportunity to further expand our programs across other eye diseases as well. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there because I know that we're very short on time during today's event. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Megan. That was really insightful. We do have 2 questions just from the audience. I might go through them quickly. The first one is the wet AMD always preceded by the dry AMD?
Wet AMD tends to be often a consequence of dry AMD. Dry AMD can actually present with very few symptoms. So many patients for the first time may present to their doctor and realise that they are then diagnosed with wet AMD and not have realised that they've had dry AMD for many, many years, because it can be asymptomatic and not actually it does not necessarily affect visual acuity like wet AMD does. When those vessels start to grow, and that makes the wet AMD, that actually is what defines the wet AMD, that is what actually perturbs the vision. And that's indeed where we'll be targeting the utility of our therapy, OPT302.
That's great. And the second question is, so with OPT302, as we're aware, was recently granted the fast track designation by the FDA. So what does that mean for Opthea as a company, and do you see applications for OPT302 in the DME space as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the fact that we got a fast track designation, firstly, recognises that the FDA saw that there was indeed an unmet medical need. Despite the availability of standard of care treatments, they recognise that there's a need for new therapies. And furthermore, they recognise that OPT302 has the potential to address that unmet medical need. So they recognise it's a very promising drug coming through clinical development. What that means for us, having been designated fast track, is that we have further opportunities for a very regular and ongoing dialogue with the FDA, which can inform our approval process and inform how we go about our phase 3. And we've been tapping into, having those regular regulatory interactions as we move forward. But perhaps most importantly, it does enable us to submit modules of our marketing authorization and biologics license application to the FDA in an incremental fashion, which in the long run means that their review process, a lot of that can be done prior to approval in a modular way, and then that accelerates the review process post your results. So potentially accelerating us getting onto market earlier would be the key outcome for the fast track designation.
Excellent. Sounds like exciting times ahead. Thanks a lot, Megan. I'd like to introduce our next panelist today. We've got John Pilcher from Neuren Pharmaceuticals. John, welcome to the panel. Could you tell us a bit about Neuren?
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, I will. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for listening. So maybe I'll just start by saying 2021 was just a massive year for Neuren, culminating in December in a positive phase 3 result in our lead indication in Rett syndrome. So that was a great year, but what it did is set us up for what should be a much bigger year in 2022 with big financial implications for the company, which I'll take you through. So just quickly for anyone who's not familiar with what Neuren does, so we have two drugs, trofinetide and NNZ-2591. We're developing them to treat 6 serious neurological disorders that emerge in early childhood. They impact just about every aspect of the child's life. There are no approved medicines, so massive burden on the kids and their families, and it's a lifelong burden. So that's what Neuren is trying to do something about. And if you look at our pipeline here, it's not an idle boast to say that I think in neurodevelopmental disorders, there's no one in the world who has a pipeline as advanced and as broad as this, including, hopefully we're going to be the first product approved to treat Rett syndrome. So we really are leading the way in the world. All of these programs have orphan drug designation in the US, and all but one has it in the EU as well. And that brings a lot of benefits to both the development and commercialization phases. One thing important to understand is that trofinetide we partnered that with a US company for North America only. So that's Avecho Pharmaceuticals, a NASDAQ listed company. So it's them that has funded and executed the phase 3 program for Rett. Very important part of that deal was that we get free and full access to everything they create to then use for registration around the world. So we're benefiting, with freely from the big investment they've made in phase 3. So, what that result did for us is put us in this position right now today. So, robustly positive results. So this trial had a higher hurdle than most phase 3 trials. It had 2 co-primary efficacy endpoints. They both had to be positive for the trial to be a success. And we in Acadia were absolutely delighted that indeed they both were strongly positive and very consistent. And in fact, the key secondary endpoint was as well. So great consistency across the results of the trial. Now, what that does is open up to us the economics of the Acadia deal. So over 2022 and 2023, we now expect to receive 111 million Australian dollars. And that's nothing to do with sales. That's purely if the product gets approved and launched. And then on top of that would be double-digit % royalties on all net sales during that period. And then the other thing that the results have done is open up that commercialization in the rest of the world for us. And we have a lot of interest from multiple companies, particularly Europe and Asia, but for the whole of the rest of the world. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then the third thing about our strong position now is that we've got this big potential upside from our second drug, NNZ-2591, across 4 different indications. We hold on to global rights to that. Just a quick look at our stock information. So, the share price performed very well in 2021, as you'd expect in December in particular, following that result. But if you look at the analyst valuations now, and these are risk-adjusted valuations of what we're worth today, not what we're potentially worth. It's $5.05 to $7.70. So we're miles off that where the share price is at the moment. So I think we're still seriously undervalued where we are at the moment. Cash-wise, very strong financial position. We reported $35 million in cash at the end of September. It'll be slightly more than that for December. And that means we're fully funded to get 2591, our second drug, ready for phase 3 across those 4 indications. And all the while, of course, expecting those economics to come from the Acadia deal. So what are the next important steps for Rett in the US? So Acadia is going to have a pre-NDA meeting with the FDA during this current quarter, and then plan to file the NDA mid-year. Now, because we have orphan drug designation and we also have fast track designation, we should get priority review, which is a 6-month review period rather than the standard 10-month review period. So that means that either right at the end of this year or beginning of next year, we should be getting approval, for marketing approval. And we in Acadia feel very good about the package they're going to be presenting to the FDA in the new drug application. I've already talked about how robustly positive the results were in that phase 3 trial. And that is important when you only have one phase 3 trial, which is very typical in these orphan indications. That it's okay, but the result needs to be robustly positive, and it certainly was. And then there's the supportive efficacy from our phase 2 trial that we as Neuren ran before the Acadia deal. And the result was very similar. And again, that makes that excellent supporting evidence much more so than if you've got a completely different result in the phase 3 trial. So yeah, we feel very good about the chances of approval here. So let me just talk a bit more about the economics that I gave you a high level view on. So this 111 million Australian dollars over 22 and 23, it's split between 2 regulatory milestone payments, and then 1/3 of the rare pediatric disease priority review voucher that Acadia should get awarded if they get marketing approval. These are tradable instruments and have been changing hands very consistently for about $100 million US. So we get 1/3 of that. So as I said, none of that is based on sales at all. So in addition, double-digit percentage royalties on all net sales, and we also have the ability to earn up to $350 million US on achievement of 4 escalating thresholds of annual net sales. Now, Acadia has said that peak annual sales potential is at least $500 million US. So if you think about it, even at the lowest possible double-digit rate, that's going to be $50 million US royalties to us. And all of this revenue falls straight to pre-tax profit. We're not paying on anything to anyone else. And we have good protection here. You get protection anyway as an orphan drug. You get exclusivity periods, but then beyond that, there's patents going out potentially to 2035. So very strong position in North America, which obviously is going to transform us financially. But then there's the rest of the world and Europe and Asia in particular. As I said, we've got a lot of interest from multiple companies. Some are specialists in individual countries, some in broader regions, or even in the whole of the rest of the world. And we're at the early stages of evaluating all of that interest, deciding what's going to deliver the best value to Neuren and our shareholders. Equally important is that there's very strong interest from families and advocacy groups and physicians around the world as well. I get bombarded by emails from all of those groups from many different parts of the world. So I'm very confident that there's a huge need for this product around the world, and hopefully we can do something about that. Haven't got time to talk much about 2591 today, but just a few highlights. The market opportunity is 5 times Rett syndrome, so this is a much bigger opportunity for us. We hold on to global rights. We're very deliberately developing all of these indications in parallel. We've got fantastic preclinical results across models of all of these disorders, and we're really hoping that we'll be able to replicate that in the first trials in patients, phase 2 trials, which are going to start very shortly for the first 3 indications, and for Prader-Willi later on this year. So if we sort of distill down, what's going to happen in the next 18 months, there are some massive milestones here for us. So as I said, Acadia's got the pre-NDA meeting. We're going to commence our phase 2 trials across Angelman, Phelan-McDermid, and Pitt-Hopkins syndromes. Then Acadia will file the new drug application mid-2022 for Rett. We'll then commence the 4th phase 2 trial. All the while, our discussions with commercial partners ex-North America will continue, and then leading up to the approval of the NDA for Rett. And then following that, phase 2 results across 4 indications for 2591. So really, the value build here, and if we can achieve all this, again, we're going to be in such a dramatically different position to where we are today, and can't wait for this period to unfold. Thanks, Ali.
Excellent. Thanks for that, John. I think you've answered quite a few of our pre-submitted questions, but we've just had one come up in the chat. The question is, with respect to the 2591, is Neuren looking outside the 4 indicators it currently has, or is it going to be resubmitted with the 4?
So at the moment, our active development is those 4 indications, and to be honest, it's a big job taking on those 4 in parallel. However, the mechanism of action of 2591 and the way all neurodevelopmental disorders are so similar clinically makes us think that there is broader application outside these 4, and so that's certainly something we'll be looking further at during the year. But in the immediate term, advancing those 4 as quickly as possible is our priority.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Please join me in welcoming our next panelist today. We have Mark Pachacz from Bioshares. Mark, welcome to the panel. Can you tell us a bit about what Bioshares does?
Yes, sure. So Bioshares is an independent investment publication. So we've been covering the listed biotech sector. I think it was probably about 30 or 40 companies when we started in the year 2000, and so we've been doing that for 21 years or so. And then we also run the BioShares Biotech Summit, which we hopefully back on, where we've scheduled it for May of this year. We'll be in Albury, so hopefully we can get a lot of people up there for that. We've had to defer it a few times because of COVID, but it's good to see the sector is thriving at the moment.
Excellent, thanks, Mark. So a few questions. I guess when we think about biotech as a space, the first name that comes to mind is the United States. They're standing at about upward of 70% with the largest market share. I guess the question is, from a fund's point of view, what trends do you see in the Australian space, and how do you think the Australian biotech sector is faring?
Look, it's fared. It's had COVID tailwinds for the last 2 years, and we've seen a lot of interest in biotech with COVID-related therapies, diagnostics, that sort of thing. And so the awareness of biotech, I think, has increased incredibly since the start of the pandemic. Over the last 2 years, we've seen $3.4 billion raised by Australian listed companies, and that's a 90% increase to the previous 2 years. So, by sort of example, sort of 8 to 10 years ago, we were seeing $500 to $600 million come into the sector. We're now seeing about $1.7 billion a year. Over the last 5 years, the market cap of the sector has increased from 81 billion to 237 billion, and we've gone from 122 companies to 157 companies. It's quite a big, a lot of interest in listings, new listings. In 2021, we had 16 new listings. On average, those new listings generate a 21% average return. But what was interesting is we're starting to see that interest sort of fall off a little bit there. The first 8 listings for the year generated a 76% average return. The second 8 listings in the second half of the year, the average decline was 33%. So obviously seeing some of that interest in biotech fall away a little bit at the moment.
As did in a lot of IPOs towards the end of last year, Mark. I guess the question that logically we think of next is, as BioShares, what are some of the key thematics that you're looking at in terms of subsectors within the space this year?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a difficult market moving forward. And I think the last week has been a pretty good example of that. I think blue sky is going to be rewarded less over the next 2 years, and I think that's going to drive investors more towards value stocks, revenue generating businesses that can outperform. And there are certainly an increasing number of those sorts of companies. If we look at companies like Aroa, Telix, Clinuvel, Cogstate, Neuren, companies that are starting to generate tangible value through revenue and profits. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some M&A activity, some acquisitions of local companies. Given the access to capital, Australian companies have been very active in acquiring other businesses. But I think some of these companies, once they generate consistent revenue streams, they're going to become acquisition targets. So companies like Anteris Technologies, Cogstate, Telix, Neuren, Microrex, Aroa, Opthea. I think over the next 2 or 3 years, that some of those companies might be receiving some bids from some international companies.
It's excellent. And with that point, Mark, just around the blue skies taking a bit of a backseat and a bit of a going back to the value, how is the investment thesis or the investment ethos changed at BioShares this year, or has it?
How is the what? Sorry.
How has the investment ethos changed at BioShares, the investment process? What sort of factors are you looking at when picking out your next investment?
Yeah, look, it's I'd say one thing. Having analysed the sector for 20 years, I was originally always driven to the technology and enticed by the technology and the potential of that. And when I look at some of the companies that have performed the best over those years. Maybe a strange thing to say, but a lot of it comes down to the CEO and how determined those CEOs are. I mean, if you look at 3 companies that I would say the most determined CEOs in the sector, from Telix, Clinuvel, and Cogstate, each of those companies have seen a tenfold increase in their share prices over the last 5 years. So that's a big factor to me when I'm looking at companies now. Not just the technology, but how determined those CEOs and also the strategy that those CEOs have for their businesses.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Let's welcome our next panelist for today's. We've got Mr. Paul Gavin from Avecho. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the panel.
Hi, Ali. How are you going?
Pretty good, thanks. Could you tell us a bit about what's happening at Avecho?
Sure. Let me just share my screen. So, look, for those of you that don't really know, Avecho is a Melbourne-based company with a novel formulation technology called TPM. Now, our background is pharmaceutical drug development for traditional non-cannabis medicines, but today I'm going to focus on talking about how TPM can be used to overcome problems associated with the formulation of cannabinoids and how we're using it to develop CBD products for pharmaceutical registration. And so just very quickly, for those of you that are unfamiliar with medicinal cannabis, so there's been a huge shift in the last 10 years, really, from the recognition of the therapeutic potential of medicinal cannabis. Many countries around the world have already enacted legislation permitting the use of cannabis extracts for medicinal purposes, and others are currently allowing consumer and recreational uses on top. It's being prescribed for a whole bunch of indications around the world, even though there's very little good quality clinical data to support what it's actually efficacious for. And because it's been illegal for so long, the normal R&D into formulation development has been really minimal. And the initial sort of product offerings are currently simple oil-based formulations. And so sort of we see that moving forward, a range of more acceptable pharmaceutical dosage forms are going to be required to fulfill the need of patients, physicians, and consumers. However, the cannabinoids themselves have a range of technical issues that make them pretty difficult to formulate. So they're oil-soluble molecules with low solubility in water, and like other oil-soluble molecules, they have pretty poor oral bioavailability. So only 3 to 8% of what you ingest is actually absorbed into the systemic circulation, and presents real problems for developing formulations that can deliver the cannabinoids efficiently. So there are a bunch of companies around the world looking at increasing bioavailability, because if you can increase the absorption of the cannabinoids, you can potentially get greater therapeutic effect. You can potentially target new indications that have been out of reach because of high doses. You can reduce the cost to patients because it's a very expensive API still, and you can provide technical and commercial differentiation for products. And so this is really where Avecho sees ourselves adding value. So our TPM, when you add it to systems containing water, it will self-assemble into tiny nanoparticles that encapsulate drug molecules. And this encapsulation can increase both drug stability and solubility. And this is especially true for poorly soluble drugs like the cannabinoids. So that's essentially what you can see in this image here. The vial on the right is cannabidiol, so CBD, just added to a system that's mostly water, and it's insoluble. It remains as a solid, doesn't dissolve at all, whereas the vial on the left contains the same formulation with a little bit of TPM. The nanoparticles encapsulate and evenly distribute the CBD throughout the formulation. And so when we see this kind of pattern, we're pretty comfortable that we can increase oral absorption or even topical absorption through the skin as well. Now, once we saw this kind of pattern, we really felt that we should be pursuing formal development of cannabinoid formulations that would have differentiation compared to the unregistered medicinal products currently sold on market. Now, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but this is sort of results from Denmark in 2020. So we had some experts over there testing the absorption from some of our formulations and comparing them versus CBD as currently prescribed to patients, which is represented by this little red bar here. This is an animal study, it's rats. They all received a single dose of a CBD formulation. We took their blood and we quantified the CBD absorption over time. And so when you compare the absorption from the CBD control, if you add a little bit of TPM to that formulation, which is labeled TPM1, you increase the absorption by about 4 times. If you add a little bit more, you increase the absorption by about 12 times. And the formulation on the right is a very bespoke Swiss watch that's got a whole lot of bells and whistles. And this formulation increased absorption by about 40 times compared to the control. Now, this is not indicative of what you would expect to be occur in people. This is to allow you to pick the formulation that you take forward into clinical development. And no guesses, we took the formulation on the right. And so what did we do next? So this prototype formulation that we had, we engaged Catalent in the US, who are the world's leading soft gel capsule developer, and they turned our prototype oil into a 75 milligram CBD soft gel capsule that's appropriate for pharmaceutical registration. And so why is it 75 milligrams? Because at the end of 2020, the TGA in Australia down-scheduled CBD. So moving forward, it will be possible to register CBD products as over-the-counter medicines. So you won't have to go to a GP, you won't have to get a prescription, you'll be able to walk into the pharmacy and buy it directly from the pharmacist. But the rub there is a maximum daily dose of 150 milligrams. So our 75 is built so that you can take 2 capsules at once if you require 150 mgs for certain indications, or other indications may need it sort of be, morning and afternoon dosing. Now, we put both of these doses, 75 and 150, into a phase 1 PK study late last year to characterize the absorption profile, because this is a requirement for our future TGA submission dossier. And so that piece of work is now done. And that allows us to go into phase 3 clinical trials in Australia with an initial focus on a sleep indication. So OTC, it has to be an indication that is appropriate for patients to self-diagnose, like sleep. And then the intent is to register it with the TGA after that. Now, while we focus on this sort of spine, we're very conscious of the fact that exactly the same product can be taken into other territories and markets and other indications with partners. And so how could this potentially work? So, I mean, the horizontal line through here is the spine of what we are doing, and that's what we're focused on, that's what we're paying for. But exactly the same product could potentially be sold now in the unregistered medicinal cannabis space through SASB. We can license it to other Australian companies for S3 registration for different indications. So we can have sleep, you can have anxiety, you can have pain, that kind of thing. And then when you look at the rest of the world, we can license by territory, because cannabis is a very fractured market around the world. All the geographies are their own little independent pieces. We can license it by sector. So the same product, although we are developing it for pharma, it will add value to unregistered medicinal cannabis. It will add value to the consumer space, the CBD health and wellness spaces, which are all huge markets as well. And as with Australia, we can split off indications. So we can start licensing the same product to different people for indications. And the global cannabis market is huge. So it's much bigger than any of the individual drug markets that we've previously looked at. And there's not much innovation or differentiation, even though the markets are so large. And so look, we have been quite vocal that we believe the product that we're developing will be of interest to many, many third parties. And so with the conclusion of the phase 1 last year, really late last year, we've essentially completed this early phase data pack, which incorporates preclinical formulation development. It's got clinical animal testing. It's got the soft gel capsule development at Catalent. It's got GMP manufacturing and all the associated documentation and validations. It's got ongoing stability, which is looking great. It's got the phase 1 clinical trial data now, so we know how it looks in people. And it's got new patents submitted, which are going through progress as we speak. So it's a really attractive head start for all the companies around the world that are looking to get into pharmaceutical CBD development, because they can essentially save themselves 2 years and jump on our product now. And this is essentially what's happened already. So we announced, I think, our phase 1 data sort of mid-December, early December, mid-December. By late December, we'd announced that we'd already had done our first licensing deal on the product. So Medterra Pharma in the US, who are an offshoot of Medterra. Medterra are one of the United States' most profitable CBD companies, and they're looking to get into the pharma space. They've licensed it for arthritis, so we can play with anyone else for all the other indications, but they've licensed arthritis, and now they'll pay for all the US development. So all the clinical trials, all the regulatory engagement. The study's already approved from ethics, and it's going to be open at IND this quarter with the FDA. And so this allows us to focus on a sleep-related indication, but Medterra to fund the development of the product for an additional indication that, being small Australian biotech, we don't have the bandwidth to pursue ourselves. And so using this strategy, we plan to collaborate with a number of well-resourced partners to progress the same product towards regulatory approval on a number of parallel fronts. And just very quickly, last slide, this year, there's a whole lot of big ticket items for us heading towards registration. We'll complete the manufacturing scale up and CMC dossier, registration batches down on stability. We'll jump into the phase 3 program. We hope to tick off a number of further partnership and licensing deals, which we hope to announce in the coming months. And we're also looking at new dosage forms. So we have a phase 2A ticking off very shortly, looking at a topical CBD gel for use in osteoarthritis. So yeah, thank you for your time and welcome to take any questions.
Thanks, Paul. That's really insightful, and it's great to see that it's such a wide addressable market, and whether you're looking at territories or indicators, Avecho really has a lot of options in front of it. I guess just in terms of one question on the TGA approval, what does the pathway look like, and where do you sort of see the main inflection point after?
Yeah, I mean, the TGA approval, the TGA, although they've downscheduled it as an S3 product, the dossiers that everyone's preparing look very similar to a normal pharmaceutical registration program. So we've obviously ticked off some of the early phase clinical trials. We need to jump onto the big phase 3 and then, do all the supporting CMC and regulatory non-clinical information. So we're hopeful, we are very hopeful that we've ticked all the boxes that the TGA will want to see. And that we'll be in a position to submit a registration dossier in the near future. Sorry, what was the second question?
Well, just in terms of the major inflection point, Paul.
Sure. So, I mean, the phase 3 trial is a major inflection point that's coming up, but also we see a number of inflection points around potential deals for the product, both locally and overseas.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for joining, Paul.
No worries.
I'd like to introduce our next and final panelist today. We've got John Melki from Genetic Signatures. Stock code is GSS. Welcome to the panel, John. Could you tell us a bit about the company?
Sure thing, Ali. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to present today. The presentation I'm about to go through will be released to the ASX in full. So I'm only going to quickly call out the highlights here as the presentation will be available for all the extra details. There is a lot to what we do, so I will just touch on those highlights today. We are a 20-year-old company and we are focused on the commercializations of a very unique technology called 3-base technology and its application to the rapid and accurate detection of infectious diseases. And this is done under the EasyScreen brand. So our results inform doctors to help them to make a diagnosis. So ultimately our test kits are helping to save lives by recognizing those infections. The kits we make are available in most major markets, and we've been selling versions of these kits for the last 10 years. We just reported our best second quarter on record with revenues of 1.4 million, and first half revenues are also a record with almost 22 million in sales. Our 4-year compound growth rate of 93%, and we have labs around the world using our tests every single day. The sales model is very straightforward. Our customers are mid to high throughput diagnostic testing laboratories. They order kits from us, they pay us on standard terms. So for us, sale to cash is quite a quick time. The testing lab runs those tests and in turn they're reimbursed through government subsidies. Genetic Signatures is profitable. We have 37.5 million in cash. We have no debt. In the last 2 quarters had a positive cash flow. We now have a footprint in our target markets, that's Europe and the US, and we're building off the success we've had from our home base in Australia. Our 3-base technology is now trusted and proven, and it helps us make what are known as syndromic test kits. And you can see here what that means is that we're able to test for a broad number of clinically relevant infections based on patient symptoms. So respiratory is obviously topical, and someone with a sore throat and runny nose could have COVID, but they could have influenza, they could have rhinovirus or other mild respiratory illnesses. And so our tests, the syndromic tests, are able to look for all of these infections in the one patient sample, which is effectively one test. The technology is a molecular technology, it's a PCR test. So we are considered the gold standard diagnostic test. And on the right of this slide here, you can see our Genetic Signatures branded instruments that we supply. And if you like, these are the printers in the printer and cartridge model because they run our tests. Now, 2 important things to note here. First is that we've quadrupled the number of these instruments that we've had in the field during the last 2 years. And these instruments are revenue generating for us. So we now have a much larger installed base, given our recent progress. And the second point to make is that all of our tests work in exactly the same way, regardless of the test being used. So once Genetic Signatures develops and releases new tests, existing customers can very easily integrate these new tests into existing workflows, as well as opening doors to new customers. So I think our increasing revenue reflects the success of this strategy. And you can see here our revenue growth, 9.4 million just in the last quarter and 21.8 million in the first half of this year. So that's more than 4.5 times our entire financial year 19 revenue just in the last 6 months of this first 6 months of this financial year. We're now in expansion phase. We are focused on Europe and the US, and our international sales teams are in place. They've had good success in signing up customers for our tests, not only for COVID, but for the full respiratory screening kits, as well as our enteric range of kits. And the quadrupling of instruments is a great base from which we can continue to support future growth. And we're in a very strong position to execute on those expansion plans. Positive cash flow for our second quarter of 4.5 million and 7.4 million for the first half. We did recently outline to the market a planned use of funds. It's listed here. It includes the development of a 3-base specific sample to result instrument, which we believe will be a game changer for testing labs, as well as setting funds aside for regulatory trials, submissions, and developing a new amplification technology that we hope will slash the time to result. Genetic Signatures produces many test kits. It's in addition to our COVID test kit. And the next slide here will show you those that we are having production or having development. Our enteric and respiratory detection kits have TGA and CE-IVD accreditation. We're free to market those in those jurisdictions. We are also seeking FDA clearance for our enteric protozoan kit, and we are currently in the trial stage for that. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. But the key here, from a revenue point of view, is that we have 7 additional products that either have some regulatory registrations or that are coming through the development and commercialization pathways. And we remember that these tests, the new tests, all work in exactly the same way, with many compatible instruments already in the field and in use every day. In terms of COVID, we were able to release a COVID test very early, but we've continued to improve on that test throughout the entire pandemic. Because of our 3-base technology, we are a perfect match to 99% of all known variants. That includes Omicron with its mutations, without any change to the sequences that we detect. Again, that's from 3-base. We've increased our patient sample compatibility to include the use of saliva. We've developed a kit that can differentiate Omicron from other variants. We've considerably sped up the time to result, reducing time to result by 1.5 to 2 hours. And importantly, we've maintained our sales volumes despite lower testing in the recent past, as labs are no longer able to pull patient samples together, given current positivity rates. In terms of investment summary, we currently have a market cap of around 185 million, fairly liquid with 2 million shares turned over on average every month. Asia Union is a majority holder, given that Christopher Abbott from Maple Brown Abbott was a founder of the company and supported us for 15 years prior to listing. Obviously happy to have Perennial and Fidelity on our register also. So looking now briefly beyond COVID, we're already leveraging the gains that we've made in the last 2 years. We've established a direct sales effort in Europe and the US. We're targeting at the moment those newly acquired customers with other approved tests that we had before the pandemic, including those for non-respiratory targets. In terms of product development, we're continuing to progress our regulatory submissions. We're investing in the next generation instrument. Developing new kits will be revenue generating for Genetic Signatures. And we are now working on newer technologies. And we've recently filed a provisional patent to cover off these inventions. But I'll conclude by summarizing the investment summary. First, it is our revenue growth. We've achieved our maiden full year profit. We're cash flow positive in the first 2 quarters of this financial year. There remain significant market opportunities for us, particularly in Europe and the US, where combined, we're over 70% of the world market. We've invested in product development and expansion, as I outlined. And finally, we have a proven business model. We have increased recognition in the bigger international markets that we're chasing. And we have a unique Australian technology that we are obviously exceptionally proud of. So in the interest of time, I will stop there, but happy to take any questions if time allows.
Thank you very much, John. I think you've answered some questions. We had a few questions largely around the company's role in the market beyond COVID-19, given that a lot of the recent success was attributed to it. But I guess to summarize it, it's really an interesting time for the business as it sort of looks out on other frontiers, especially when there's so many exciting developments happening in the background. So thanks for presenting today. Just to wrap it up, guys, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. A big thank you to all of our panelists and to Monsoon Communications. I guess some of the key takeaways from today from a peak asset management perspective as well is while biotech has seen quite a phenomenal rise over the last 2 years, we're moving away from a bit more of that blue sky approach, going back to values and fundamentals, especially this year from an investment perspective. With a lot of approvals and whether it's TGA or FDA coming up in parts to market, it's really an exciting time for our featured companies here today. If you've got any further questions, feel free to write in to us post the webinar. But thank you very much for joining. I'm Ali Ukani and signing off today. Thanks, guys.